Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast. I'm Matt Donnelly, and joining me once again, Miss Fantasy herself, Tera Roberts. How you doing, Tera?
I'm doing good, good-ish. I bumped my head today. I've considered myself questionable with a mild concussion, but other than that, I think I'm ready to go for week 6.
Well, you got to be careful now because concussion protocol seems to be stretching further and further each and every year. We saw Malik Neighbors. The general rule is that 8 to 10 day kind of period there for concussions. We've seen that extend a little bit more this year than maybe in years past. I'm not going to say that they're caring more about concussions because now they're telling us concussions are down compared to most seasons. But hey, Tera, you're like Nico Collins. You're day to day. You're week to week. I mean, aren't we all really day to day and week to week in this fantasy football season? I mean, this has been a season unlike any other that I can remember. We talk about injuries, and it's not just the injuries we're dealing with, it's who the injuries happen to be. We already knew that TJ Hawkinson was going to miss time. We knew Nick Chubb was going to miss time. And then we got the whole plethora of injuries that have kind of snuck up on us, the Puka Nakuas, the Cooper Cups. We had to deal with A.J. Brown, that hamstring, Devontae Adams and his, call it a hamstring, I guess. I mean, I don't remember having hamstring issues in Green Bay, but hey, who am I to judge? And then we've had our Joe Mixon ankles, our Jonathan Taylor ankles, Nico Collins hamstring last week, which, is about a 2-week period from what we've seen. Then we got news that Rashee Rice, he's heading to the IR, more than likely, not officially, but they did find a little bit more damage in that knee than what they had hoped for, an LCL, plus some kind of weird bicep tendon in the knee. I don't know. It's a very rare type thing from my understanding. So we're looking at about a 6-week recovery for Rashee Rice. So yes, you can drop the Kansas City Chiefs pass catcher. And no, he won't be available if the Chiefs make the Super Bowl. Christian Watson, Tera, correct me if you've heard this before, but Christian Watson is on the IR, or is not on the IR, but he's injured once again. Is there any player that you can remember, and you with your Packers fandom, any player that you can recall being injured more often than Christian Watson with so much talent?
Maybe he's just waiting, like give him 5 years and he can hit his Raheem Mostert stride and give us a couple seasons where he just balls out. But we've got to wait until he's like 28, 29, 30, and then it'll hit. Yeah. We'll go with that.
I'm kind of hoping he follows that Keenan Allen trajectory when it comes to his career. I mean, remember when Keenan Allen was considered injury prone? I don't like to throw that injury prone out there as a tag for anybody, but it's feeling eerily similar to what Keenan Allen went on early on in his career. And, he's been pretty healthy since then. He's had some good seasons. We've talked about him back and forth on this show over the last, good Lord, what are we at? 4 or 5 years we've been doing this show? I mean, I can't even remember. It's been a while, but Keenan Allen's name has come up quite a bit and his injury history. We know about Christian McCaffrey's Achilles tendonitis, but we just found out he's got Achilles tendonitis in both of his legs. So, hey, the hits just keep on coming, and we know there's more to come here in week number 6. So we're here to help you prepare because it's not just the injuries that we have to deal with. We have to deal with the bye weeks, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Los Angeles Rams, the Miami Dolphins, and the Minnesota Vikings here in week number 6. So, Tera, when we look across the fantasy football landscape, we have to do some dumpster diving. I mean, last week, I started like Bo Melton and Ty Goodson in one league in an ESPN league there for the Kings Classic. Like I had a scrape. I mean, it's like a 16-team league or 14-team league, so there's very little on the waiver wire. So who's that one player? We're going to give 3 each here, but give me one player right now that you are grabbing off the waivers, probably Wednesday night.
Oh man. We'll talk about guys that are surprisingly below 50% rostered. Darnell Mooney is one of them. I was kind of shocked on that one. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if it's that people are just kind of thinking that this isn't really production that's going to stick, or they're not trusting Atlanta or Kirk Cousins, or it's, thinking that, obviously Drake London is the dominant force there. Maybe they're still holding a candle for Kyle Pitts. I don't know. But Darnell Mooney is real. We saw it early in his career, and yes, it disappeared, but unfortunately that was not his fault. And apparently it wasn't Justin Fields' fault either. It was, Matt Eberflus. We blame him for everything under the sun. But Darnell Mooney now in this offense in Atlanta, he just fits so perfectly. plays perfectly off of Drake London. I love his role in this offense. He's formed an excellent connection with Cousins, earned the trust there. And aside from that week one performance where everybody was kind of dreadful and Kirk Cousins was just literally getting his Achilles back under him, he's been fantastic, very usable, flex worthy every single week. And this is not reactionary to the fantastic, insane performance, where if you started him, and I raised my hand because I definitely did, he blew up in your fantasy lineup. Nope. This is kind of shock that he's not higher rostered, in far less rostered than guys who are just not putting up numbers at all. So go grab yourself some Darnell Mooney.
Everyone needs a little bit of Mooney in their life. I mean, Tara, how long have I been preaching Darnell Mooney? 1 year I was right, 1 year I was wrong, and now I'm about to be right once again. I like to stick with my guys, right or wrong. I'm stubborn. I'm a stubborn fantasy analyst. I will stick with my guys, but I think you mentioned a very key word there, and that was Kirk Cousins' Achilles. He's finally starting to look like the Kirk Cousins of old. Now, we knew there was going to be some growing pains because it was on that drive leg. And we see that in the first couple of weeks. There's some ducks that he was throwing. He was turfing some balls. It wasn't pretty, but it seems as he keeps on getting going, this Falcons offense is going to get going, and they're going to be very dangerous for everyone out there, especially maybe some Bijan Robinson managers, because they've taken probably a brunt of the hit so far. For me, my number one waiver wire claim here right now is Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys. Ever since Brandon Cooks was put on the IR there, we knew that someone in Dallas had to step up. So if you're looking for that deep sleeper, I think we got a glimpse of him last week on Monday Night Football. I mean, or Sunday Night Football, we all could see what Jalen Tolbert could do. He took advantage of all the coverage rolling across to CeeDee Lamb, and he led the team in targets with 10, receptions with 7, receiving yards with 87. Then he had that game-winning touchdown. We know that CeeDee Lamb is going to get his. There's no question about that, especially this week against the Detroit Lions. Lamb is going to eat, but you know what? He's going to make sure there's a little bit of meat on the bone for Jalen Tolbert, who's coming off like 12.5% target share for the first 4 weeks of the season. Then last week, 24.4%. That's without Brandon Cooks. But here's something that people don't quite realize when I talk about Jalen Tolbert. Over the last 4 Dallas Cowboys contests, targets, 31 for Lamb, 27 for Tolbert. PPR points. Tara, PPR. I know you love PPR. 62.7 for Lamb over the last 4 games. Jalen Tolbert, 54.5. So there's not a gap that's too great there. We're talking like 8 points difference in PPR over 4 games. That's 2 points per game between CeeDee Lamb, the consensus number 1 wide receiver in fantasy, and Jalen Tolbert, who is probably rostered, less than 35% of leagues, maybe 40% at max. I mean, for me, this is a guy that you got to get in. And by the way, like with these injuries at the position, plus the bye weeks, Tolbert is a guy you could probably put into your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, flex at worst. Tara, give me another waiver wire.
Let's go with Tyrone Tracy here. Tyrone Tracy, go out and get him if he is on your waiver wire. He looked fantastic in week 5 as the lead back. This was one of those preseason names where, we get these rookies who were later round draft picks and they fall into good situations where they could theoretically become the RB1. And we kind of fall in love with the theory of them being the RB1, like maybe a Sean Tucker of prior years. But this is different with Tyrone Tracy. He's actually gotten the opportunity and has averaged over 7 yards per carry last week when given the opportunity here. And you got to remember that, again, Devin Singletary is not just going to flat out lose his job being hurt. He'll have the opportunity to come back and still participate and, probably get preference as the lead back here. But Tyrone Tracy got the opportunity to show what he's got. He's more than likely to try and push and make this a committee. Devin Singletary is not a guy that the Giants invested a ton of money into this offseason. So as the Giants start to move forward, and they've been competitive, right? But I think realistically, they also know that there's still some work that has to be done in this team overall. So if they get, a little bit further into the season and it looks like obviously this is not a playoff type situation and they decide we really want to focus on the development of our young players, Tyrone Tracy can be one of those guys. So even if Singletary comes back this week and he gets the lead role, Tyrone Tracy is a guy that you want to hold, because when a rookie pops, when he shows that level of potential, that is the recipe for back half production. So grab him, hold him. Even if Singletary comes back and just completely dominates and touches, this is a guy that you want on your bench for the long haul here. So grab him now while you can.
Tyrone Tracy is one of those people that we talked about in the offseason, Tara, right on this show, about how good of a player he actually happens to be. He was one of our favorite third-round rookie draft picks all throughout the process. And his story is kind of funny here because he got his run last week thanks to an Eric Gray fumble, which probably shouldn't have been a fumble to begin with. I mean, that should have been that was a touchdown. That really was a touchdown. And they give it a fumble, it gets returned the other way. We know what happens there. Eric Gray kind of loses those touches. Tyrone Tracy gets it, and he absolutely crushed it. And you're right, Devin Singletary is not going to lose his job, but it's going to be a 60-40 split. He's going to lose at least 40% of those snaps to Tyrone Tracy because of how he popped. Expect that to go on. Now, I do a starts and sits show every single week, and I was trying to go the starts. There's some good matchups for running backs this week. There's not a lot of terrible matchups for good running backs. A lot of the tough defenses this week, they're playing some weaker competition at the running back position. So I'm like, oh man, who am I going to put in my sits this week? I'm like going through, I'm like, well, you know what? Ramondre Stevenson, I can put him in there because the whole New England dysfunction. Brian Robinson's probably got the toughest matchup for running backs because they're dealing with the Baltimore Ravens. So it's like, who am I going to put in here? And I thought, you know what? I'm looking at the thing. I'm like, you know what? This isn't a bad matchup. However, the situation is not great for Travis Etienne because Tank Bigsby is a guy you need to get off your waivers right now. Out-carried Etienne 13-6, not to mention outgained him by 84 yards on the ground. This a week. If it was just a 1 week thing, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you know what? All right, good job. 1 week. But this is a week after Bigsby ran for 90 yards in a Colts contest that saw Etienne finish with just 50 yards. So this is now 2 weeks in a row he's been outgained on the ground. Now he's getting out-touched. Yes, Etienne, PPR, fantastic, 20.6% target share. But here's where people, especially Etienne managers, need to be worried. Since week number 3, Bigsby has carried every single ball inside the 5-yard line. That means every time that it's not very often, but every time the Jaguars get inside the 5, it's Bigsby on the field, not Travis Etienne. And for the first time this season, Bigsby actually outsnapped Travis Etienne for those backfield snaps. And I think that's important because now we get a game this week in which the Jaguars are playing the Chicago Bears, who are allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the position this season at 24.06. This is the same Bears team that let Chuba Hubbard run wild for 7.5 yards per carry, 97 yards in a game in which Carolina basically couldn't even run the ball after the first quarter because the game was already over again. So they were throwing. I'm not going to say that Bigsby is going to take over this job completely this week, but I'm telling you, there's something here. The way Bigsby's been running the last 2 weeks, he has been the more efficient runner. It's kind of like the whole Bucky Irvin, Rashad White situation there in Tampa Bay, where White is definitely the better pass catcher. We didn't think Irving was going to come on the way he did until he did. And I think Bigsby's making that same move this week. So, hey, he's a guy you got to get on that priority this week for me, Tara. I see you nodding your head. I see some agreement. This feels good to be agreeing on stuff once again. It feels good, doesn't it?
It does. It does. But I feel like we were always like, we were right here, Matt. We were just jumping right back on track.
There's always major when I was in between all the time. Tara, give me a third waiver wire here right now for the people.
Braylon Allen. I know. This one might feel like, why are we grabbing Braylon Allen when the Jets offense is, and the team, not just the offense, the team is going into complete disarray. We've got coaches fired. We've got an owner sitting there essentially saying, hey, Hassan Reddick, you need to come back now, but not offering it's madness. It's madness and chaos over there in New York. But again, as disappointing as this offense as a whole has been, especially the run game, we have to remember that this is a situation where they've been in difficult matchups, to be honest. So the lack of production from the run game in terms of both Breece Hall and Braylon Allen over the past couple of weeks, we got to chalk that one up to them facing difficult matchups. And no, it doesn't really get better for the Jets offense anytime in the near future. But for the backups, for the running backs this week, the matchup is pretty good here. We've got Buffalo here. You do not want to attack them through the air. Even though Aaron Rodgers, he's going to want his opportunity to shine now that the coach has been fired.
He better.
The smartest way for them to attack this Buffalo defense is on the ground. We saw it with Baltimore where they just completely abandoned the pass and just left it to Derrick Henry. And are either of these running backs Derrick Henry? No, but they can put up good production in an advantageous matchup. And the Bills have allowed significant volume on the ground, not just to Derrick Henry here. So it's a good matchup here. Braylon Allen has been contributing significantly in terms of the workload here. We talk about these 60-40 splits. He's really just kind of poking at the side there of Breece Hall. So I could see this as a game where he gets good volume in a good matchup. And, hey, even if you're not courageous enough to use him this week, I'm 99% sure I might have to in maybe a lineup. But even if you don't, for the long haul, this is, again, a guy that you want to have on your fantasy bench, because if something happens to Breece Hall, this is absolutely league-winning upside here that he has showcased. So roster Braylon Allen, he should not be out on waivers.
And like you said, if you're looking for a guy to plug in your lineup this week, you could do worse than Braylon Allen against the Buffalo Bills, because the Buffalo Bills are a horrible team. This is a get-right type game here for Breece Hall. Braylon Allen's going to factor into this one at some time, because I was joking here on one of my shows I was doing. I'm like, that corner over there, that's for me to curl in the fetal position for Breece Hall. That corner over there is for me to curl into the fetal position for Bijan Robinson. I mean, I got a lot of corners down here in my basement that are just for me to kind of rock myself, because fantasy football has given me so many issues, man. So many problems with so much love at the same time. And speaking of love, this player has been one of those guys I've absolutely loved for quite some time. I've been talking about him a lot, banging the drum. But sometimes when you bang the drum, it goes unnoticed. I mean, it's like noise out there that people just kind of block out. What if I told you on the waivers there is a wide receiver that, when compared to Malik Neighbors, actually has a greater targets per route run, 35.1% to 34.7%, which is Neighbors. Neighbors is fantastic. We love Neighbors. If you look at the first downs per route run, 14.9% for this player, 12.7% for Neighbors. Yards per route run, 2.57 for Neighbors, 2.34 for Josh Downs, baby. Get Josh Downs right now. He's in the waiver. I don't know why he's still on the waiver wire. It's kind of like the whole Darnell Mooney thing. What does he have to do to get into someone's lineup? And it's not like he's just coming out of nowhere to do this. This is a Colts team. We're talking about a team like right now. Over the last 2 weeks, 17 receptions. That is tied for third. 11 first downs. That is tied for first. All Josh Downs is doing is catching balls. We love PPR. This is great. Like, I would have usually pumped up Wan'Dale Robinson, because if he's on waiver wires, he should not be on the waiver wire either. He is. I love myself some Wan'Dale, especially in PPR leagues. He's like a Julian Edelman type player, right? He's not over on fantasy points. They have this thing called average separation score, or AS, and Wan'Dale Robinson doesn't have a great AS score, but guess what? He's got a quarterback that loves to chuck the ball around. Let's give Daniel Jones a little bit of love here too while we're at it, because Daniel Jones is kind of like that forgotten guy. And Terry, you mentioned Devin Singletary. We talked about Tyrone Tracy. I know I'm getting off topic here on Josh Downs, because that's kind of what I do, but I'm kind of digging the whole New York Giants offense. I don't know if I should be admitting that on the air here or not, but I'm kind of digging it. Anyway, back to Josh Downs. This is a guy that needs to be rostered right now. Anthony Richardson loves him. Joe Flacco loves him. Every quarterback that plays with a kid loves him. Why is he on your waivers? Probably because he was injured early on in the season and people forgot about him. Well, it's time to remember Josh Downs, because he's one of those guys that is going to be a solid flex wide receiver 3 the rest of the season. Terry, are we missing anyone else on the waivers? Is there anyone else that we should absolutely pound the table for this week? Who do you got? One more? No, we good?
If you know what? Now that you're on the topic of the Giants, if you need a quarterback, and I've had, Daniel Jones. If you need a quarterback on waivers, grab yourself some Daniel Jones in this matchup. We talked about it. You talked about Wan'Dale Robinson, Malik Neighbors. In theory, we get him back this week. Nice matchup here. You could do a lot worse than Daniel Jones at quarterback. He has actually been fairly steady in good matchups.
I can't believe we're here. Tara, who would you rather start this week? Daniel Jones or Aaron Rodgers?
Oh, Daniel Jones. That's not even close. What, like?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I got one for you. Say rest of the season, Tara. Rest of the season, because this is kind of a popular thing. Daniel Jones or Patrick Mahomes? See right there. If you're just listening to the audio right now, there was a side head tilt going on there. One of those things like, I know what the answer is supposed to be, but that's not necessarily the answer in this case. We're talking.
We do this thing. We rank like for competition. Like we do this thing where we can.
This is what I'm talking about. Like I'm looking at the Fantasy Pros leaderboard right now for the quarterback position. Mahomes isn't even in the top 15 right now.
Yeah, I have moved Mahomes down appropriately. I'm not gonna let's see where do I have him in rankings this week? It's probably what's wrong with my rankings?
He's on bye week this week, so you won't have him in your rankings this week. But yeah,
but I think last week I moved him down to like 11 or 12.
You're not wrong. I had this question in a lot of Discord channels I'm dealing with. It's like, would you drop Patrick Mahomes? And first off, the first thing that comes to your head is, no, you don't drop Patrick Mahomes. And you're like, then you stop yourself for a second. You do the head tilt. And you're like, there are probably 13 other quarterbacks I would start ahead of Mahomes any given week. And I think that's where we're at. But hey, you know what? We'll digress this conversation on Patrick Mahomes for next week when he's back in the lineup and dealing with that kind of stuff. But Tara, every time we hit the waiver wire, there's always the chasing points aspect to it. There's always that fool's gold when it comes to the waiver wire, that booby trap, so to speak. Who's that trap play for you in the waiver wire this week? Who are you trying to avoid that's getting hyped up probably more than they should be?
And I want to be, so I'll say this, and I want to be cautious with this, but Jordan Whittington is someone who we had a lot of preseason hype around. And the reality is that, playing for the Rams, you get that Puka Nacua aura of, who's going to be the next Puka Nacua? Who's going to be the next Puka Nacua? It could just be the guy that's playing with Puka Nacua. And I feel like people are very tied to the idea of him. And he has, popped as much as you can within that Rams offense right now because they are dealing with some struggles in the pass game. And I see a lot of people saying that they want to add him and hold him, and this is the guy that they think can, give them value as Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua come back. And I just don't know if that's the case. Sometimes we see somebody and we want them to be more than what they can technically be within the context of a specific offense. Maybe if he had the opportunity somewhere, he could pop on another team. But the problem is that if we get both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp back into this lineup, Whittington just doesn't have a role. The wide receiver 3 with those two in the lineup has to be someone else who has different capabilities. And I don't know if Whittington fits that, right? He more so fits what a Cooper Kupp would be doing. So if Cooper Kupp's coming back, we're not going to have 2 Cooper Kupps and then another Puka Nacua. Unfortunately, I kind of think that this one is a little bit fool's gold here to where he's fantastic, but once both receivers are back, there's not going to be that value for us, unfortunately.
You know what? I couldn't agree more. Again, with Whittington. I mean, there's too many melts and so much inconsistency with who Matthew Stafford's been targeting. And then eventually you're going to get these other bodies back, and then he's just going to go right back to where he wasn't even like in the lineup the first couple weeks before the injuries occurred. Yeah. Now, for me, this shouldn't surprise anybody who's listened to me over the last who knows how many years. It's Juju Smith-Schuster. Never Juju. Never, ever, 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 ever Juju. His knees are worse than mine. Like, I got like Hubba Bubba kind of holding my knees together. He's got like Juicy Fruit. Okay. It's not good. Even if you look at the numbers from last, I get the production aspect of things, and I get the injuries for the Kansas City Chiefs. But if you look at the first read target rates, Xavier Worthy actually led the Chiefs at 27%, Travis Kelce at 23%, and then Juju had 18%, the same number as McCole Hardman, except, I mean, he capitalized. I will give him credit there. But Juju's one step away from being out for the rest of the season because that's what Juju happens to do. You can't trust him. Juju Smith-Schuster is one of the many reasons why I have trust issues in my everyday life. You cannot trust this guy. It's like, you know what? I might as well just go ask Jared Mayo what he thinks of Juju Smith-Schuster and do the opposite of what Jared Mayo says. By the way, not cool, Jared. Not cool at all. Doing me dirty there, the whole Antonio Gibson thing last week. So for me, it happens to be Juju Smith-Schuster. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, but I will go down being wrong rather than putting Juju Smith-Schuster into my lineup before I put a bid on him, before anything. I don't even know if I'd take him if I got him for free, to be honest with you. But that's my issue right there. That is my issue, and I own that issue. I'm okay with owning it, but he's a guy I'm not going to put in my lineup anytime soon.
I like Juju. What can I say? I like Juju. I want Juju to succeed. And yeah, I think, unless they end up making a trade for another receiver, I think Juju's going to be it.
Well, and that might very well be the case. Now, we have heard guys like Amari Cooper, whose contract is very reasonable, could find himself in Kansas City. I mean, a lot of his money was converted into signing bonus, so there's not a whole lot of cap hit there. He's a name to be watching here. I think November 5th is the trade deadline. So, and of course, we'll be watching Devontae Adams. So there's no way Adams is going to Kansas City. So we'll see how this all plays out the next little while. Now, I'm not going to panic over anyone's opinions on Juju Smith-Schuster, but what I am going to ask you, Tara, give me a player right now, a player that you are starting to panic about when it comes to fantasy football.
Player that I am starting. Well, you know what? Let's keep on the track that you were saying there. Amari Cooper, and unfortunately, it's not his fault.
Nope.
Amari Cooper has, volatility has always been a part of Amari Cooper's game. It's not easily predictable. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, he's an incredibly high upside player. He is an explosive player. Even at age 30, he's a guy that you trust and say, you know what, if I were to quarterback aside, right, in an ideal scenario, if I were to say, who do I trust to just give me 1,000 yards, right? Who do I know for sure is going to go out and get there just overall the season, put up the exact production that he is supposed to? It's Amari Cooper. You know that you can depend on him overall to reach a certain level. Unfortunately, this season, due to circumstances outside of his control, the targets that he is getting are absolute trash, unfortunately. And when you've got a catch rate that is less than 50%, we talk about a Khalil Shakir who's sitting there catching everything in the world, and you got poor Mark Cooper who's just can't catch a cold. Unfortunately, there's nothing out there for him, and you're just waiting for those boom opportunities, and they come every now and then against the Giants. Randomly, the Giants, we talked about that. Look at us talking about the Giants. They have a decent defense. They're not a layup matchup. Amari Cooper popped about against them, but against a team like Jacksonville, against a team like Vegas, I mean, defenses where Amari Cooper should go off. Washington, nope, not happening outside of his control. And as long as he is there with Deshaun Watson until Watson can pull himself together, you just can't trust it. It's so difficult. And a boom game will come because he has that capability. But unfortunately, the floor has dipped so low. You just feel so uncomfortable when you can put him out there in your fantasy lineup and get 3 points, and that's it. And the upside, it feels like it's not even worth it at this point. And I hate that for him. I hope things change but I just don't know if Deshaun Watson has those capabilities to make the adjustments at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, look at Deshaun Watson. What do you have? Like 147 yards passing in that game. Amari Cooper had 60 of them. I mean, he's catching over half of what Watson's throwing, except Watson ain't throwing nothing. And if you can't catch a cold in Cleveland, there's bigger issues to worry about. Now, for me, one of the guys that's on my list, it's George Pickens. Listen, this is a Pittsburgh Steelers thing. Martavius Bryant traded, bad attitude. Antonio Brown, guess what? Bad attitude, traded. Chase Claypool, see where I'm going with this? Bad attitude, he gone. Deontay Johnson, disgruntled somewhat, he gone. George Pickens, hey, it didn't work out for Bryant, didn't work out for Brown, didn't really work out for Claypool. Johnson's doing okay so far. He's been up and down, but hey, leaving Pittsburgh is not necessarily a good thing. And I'm looking at where George Pickens happens to be, and I can't remember. He's like wide receiver 42 right now, PPR. Like he's not even a wide receiver 4 right now, or he is a wide receiver 4, sorry, when it comes to fantasy. A guy that maybe you put in your flex and hope something happens. And I don't think things are changing, because the only change that might come in Pittsburgh is going from Justin Fields to Russell Wilson, and that does not help anybody. It really doesn't. And I look around and there's no way I can get behind anything that Pickens does. Maybe this is a residual of Arthur Smith, because we saw what he did to Drake London back in Atlanta, where they were getting like a 92, 95% route run rate there. And yet 27% target share with a 43% air yard share. You think these numbers would all add up, but they don't. And yes, that is where I'm going to start the panicking. And then you look at what Pickens did the other night, 59% of the offensive snaps. Less than 60% of the snaps George Pickens is on. He's the only player that can catch the ball on this team, and they would rather him not be on the field when they need a play being made. That's alarming to me, Tara. That is alarming. I mean, I look at this and I got to get rid of Pickens right now. He doesn't strike me as a player who's going to magically change his attitude. Right? We watched him at the end of the game basically face mask a dude, throw him to the ground type style. A Tiger can't change their stripes, right? I mean, that's one of those things that we've been taught our whole lives growing up. It's like, I don't want to be the toad when it comes to fantasy football and put George Pickens, the scorpion, on my back, expect myself to be able to cross the river here. It's not going to work out well, right? You're going to get stung, and I feel like you're going to get stung by George Pickens if you keep him on your fantasy roster much longer. Tara, do you have another player that you're starting to panic about a little bit, who you're maybe trying to get away from?
Yeah, well, I can't get away from him because I have none. And you know what? This is like theoretical panic if other people are panicked, because I'm not panicked, because I abandoned this ship a long, long time ago. Javonte Williams is somebody who, at this point, it's just straight up not happening. And I feel bad because, as you guys know, I am a Clemson girly, which means that I support my ACC brethren like ride or die here. But the support, it's reached its limit with Javonte, unfortunately. The good news is that he appears to be the RB1 in that offense. The bad news is that doesn't particularly matter for fantasy purposes, unfortunately. Even if he's getting the most touches, the productivity just straight up isn't there, unfortunately. When you are nearly being outrushed by your quarterback and his name is not Lamar Jackson, and even then that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen. You start to look at the situation and say that this is just never going to happen in the context of this offense for you. No rushing touchdowns, no receiving touchdowns. He exists, unfortunately. The production isn't there. Even in good matchups, you put him out there and it's like, okay, like last week, like it was fine, right? 13 carries, 61 yards. That's not fantastic. Not a lot of volume. Got production through the air, which carried him onto a fine fantasy day. But at the end of the day, you can't rely on that if that's all you're getting in an ideal matchup, because there's not a whole bunch of ideal matchups down the road. So at this point with Javonte Williams, I look at him and if I had a share, I certainly wouldn't want to put him in my starting lineup at this point. So, unfortunately, there's just not the upside. So on your bench, he's just kind of DOA as well. So there's theoretical panic in there for him, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. And I've been a Javonte Williams guy for a while. I've really wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I've kind of rode with him. I don't know if I can ride with him anymore, and I don't know if I can ride with Anthony Richardson anymore. Now, I get he's essentially a rookie. Okay, he played a couple games last season, then he got hurt. Now he's played a couple games this season. He's still kind of in his rookie season right now, I guess, technically, but not really, because he's being outplayed by Joe Flacco. Let's call it the way it is. Like, not to take anything away from Joe Flacco, but anything that Anthony Richardson can do, Joe Flacco can do. We watched him scramble around and turn into the magic man and make a pass. Like, we're watching Joe Flacco do things that dudes his age shouldn't be doing. Like, I'm Joe Flacco's age, and I ain't doing any of that. I'll tell you that right now. If you look from a passing standpoint, Richardson in 4 games, 654 yards passing, 50.6 completion percentage. Joe Flacco, 527 yards passing in 2 games, 70% completion percentage. Richardson, 6.7 yards per carry. Flacco, 5 yards per carry on his 5 rushing attempts. You're not losing much. I mean, the threat, obviously Joe Flacco is not as big of a threat to run, but Flacco's the better passer, and he makes this offense look a little bit better. He gets the most out of Pittman, the most out of Downs. I mean, I guess Richardson gets the most out of Alec Pierce, because where Richardson seems to struggle is those intermediate patterns. We know he's got a big arm. Richardson could chuck it down the field with the best of them. That's why we're seeing Alec Pierce have 100 more receiving yards this season than Michael Pittman. Josh Downs, we know what he can do underneath. Great ball player. I love him. You know how I feel about him. But Richardson's not going to get the most out of Michael Pittman that maybe Joe Flacco does. So, yes, I'm starting to panic about Anthony Richardson because it starts to affect my Michael Pittman Jr. shares, and I can't have that. It's already bad enough that Downs is the guy that I love, and he's doing what he's doing, and Alec Pierce is doing what he's doing on the deep ball. So if I got a guy taking points away on the deep ball, I got a guy taking away the points on the short ball, and I got a quarterback who can't throw the intermediate ball, Pittman is the guy who's getting crushed here. So, yeah, I'm worried about Anthony Richardson. I know a little bit about ball. I really wish Major was here on the show right now, because I could see him just going off on a whole spiel about this here right now. But, hey, with all due respect, we haven't even talked about running backs as far as guys we're panicking about. Now, Tara, we know that it's been a rough season for some guys right now, but are there running backs that are maybe underperforming, or wide receivers, tight ends? I mean, pretty much every tight end who are underperforming right now, but you're not worried about? Who would that be? Who are you saying, hey, you know what? Because fantasy managers, we have a bad habit of panicking and not practicing patience. And I've been practicing patience, telling people, be patient, be patient. We're in week 6 now. Patience is probably no longer an option for a lot of people. So which players right now who've been underperforming do you see turning it around here soon?
I don't know if this one really counts. But Tony Pollard, because again, this is not someone who, it's not his fault. Unfortunately, we get into a situation where Will Levis is out there, and because everybody, the defense, they know how he is. Unfortunately, it makes it difficult for the running backs to succeed and thrive and find room. Tajay Spears has even struggled as well. I don't think it's a coincidence that Will Levis went down last week against Miami, and all of a sudden we get a nice little uptick in production from Tony Pollard there. And I hate it because he looks very different from last year. And I feel very encouraged. And I came in here skeptical of him, to be honest. And I favored Tajay Spears based off of what I saw last year from Tajay Spears. But Pollard has looked fantastic. He looks fully healed. There's no issue on his end. He looks competent and capable of being a high volume lead back. Unfortunately, the offense is just not a good situation. But that said, even though I don't have much faith that Will Levis is going to turn it around, there are some good matchups coming up where it will be advantageous for the running backs here. We've got Indianapolis here. That's a fantastic matchup. I will absolutely roll out Tony Pollard with confidence. Buffalo, we talked about that matchup being excellent for running backs. Another time to roll him out with confidence here. So, I know it sucks. I know the Titans offense sucks. I know it's frustrating, but we're not panicking over Tony Pollard because none of this is his fault. And maybe Will Levis can work himself out, but volume will be on the side here of Tony Pollard, and he is the RB1 of this offense.
I'm so glad you brought up Will Levis, and here's my thoughts on that.
Nope, I'm good. Nope.
Oh, I got to keep that clip there. That's always going to stay on the show sheet here, no matter what. I'm glad you mentioned the Buffalo Bills, because when we have elite talent out there, we have this little bit of a concern about what to do with it when it's not performing. And we've got a couple running backs that have not lived up to the expectations. Running backs that probably would have been drafted in the top 5 of fantasy drafts back in August. And talk about Breece Hall, who, by the way, is still RB13, thanks to 3 weeks that he started off really good. Last week was not so good. But, I mean, if you look at everything, this week is one of those bounce back weeks. Last week, they kind of got Garrett Wilson going there, 22 targets, something that hasn't been done since, I think, 2015 when Antonio Brown had 22 targets in a contest. They got to get Breece Hall back involved in the passing game. 20.7% target share, 27.6% target share in the first 2 weeks. Then 14.7, 12.2, 7.8. See where I'm going with this? Why is there a lack of production for Breece Hall? It's because he hasn't been involved in the passing game. Against the Buffalo Bills, the Texans combo of Cam Akers and Dare Ogunbowale, they combined for 134 yards. And I think I actually pronounced his name right there, pretty darn close. So I'm going to take credit for getting Dare's name proper. This is a Buffalo Bills team allowing 34.3 fantasy points per game. That is like second in the league in that category. This is a game in which Breece Hall has to bounce back. It's a primetime matchup. If he can't bounce back in this game, then I'll hit the panic button. But I feel pretty good about Breece Hall going this one. And same thing with Bijan Robinson. I'm going to fire him up this week. This is another get-right game. It's 2 elite backs who've struggled, both getting get-right games, because Robinson, he draws the Carolina Panthers. Now, I know, with all due respect, Tyler Algier has been outperforming Robinson, 5.4 yards per carry kind of style. But if you take a look at, I think Robinson right now is RB18. So he's kind of on that fringe, RB2, but he's supposed to be RB number 2, not an RB2. So there is where people are starting to panic. Patience. This offense in Atlanta is just getting going. They're finally getting Cousins passing, which is going to open things up for Bijan Robinson. Things will get right in Atlanta, but you got to stay patient. If you are out there right now, Hall and Robinson, this may be the cheapest you could acquire their services for in fantasy. Throw out a trade out there, maybe a wide receiver 2, maybe an RB2, a 2-for-1 type package. See what you can do. Maybe you get a frustrated owner, maybe do a DK Metcalf or Breece Hall type trade. I love DK Metcalf, but you know what? Capitalize on him, sell him a little bit high, acquire Breece Hall for a low cost. I mean, these are the type of things that we have to be looking at doing. Is there another player, Tara, that you maybe are looking to acquire on the cheap right now?
I mean, I guess theoretically, as cheap as you could get him. Let's talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, this is a guy who he popped, absolutely. But there is some underlying panic here for him, and understandably so, because, for the life of me, it's difficult to figure out. But, after the first quarter, he appears to disappear at times. He gets targeted early and big, a big, deep threat. He gave us that overall wide receiver 1 performance where he had 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, but that was literally in the first quarter. And after that, absolutely nothing. Now, following up that, he's failed to even come close to that. Subpar performance against Detroit, we could understand. Then you come around to Washington again, 5 receptions, 45 yards, a touchdown. It's just kind of like, last week against San Francisco, non-existent. I feel like sometimes we forget, and maybe that's because we're also looking across the way at Malik Neighbors, who has been on a roll here, obviously when healthy. And we forget that this is a rookie, right? And for all of his talent in the world and the ability to immediately step up and be the wide receiver one, it's a rookie. And it's a rookie in a kind of a weird offensive situation, right? Because for some reason, they're really just not pushing aggressive volume with Kyler Murray. I thought that we'd see a little bit more last week, and Kyler Murray made it work from a fantasy perspective, particularly on the ground and through touchdowns. But the volume, again, just wasn't there. He has maxed out. And it was in that game where Marvin Harrison Jr. did have the massive performance. Kyler Murray is maxed out at 266 passing yards. He has not completed more than 21 attempts. It is peculiar. And the problem is that he hasn't been, wilding out in terms of throwing interceptions. He's been efficient. For some reason, they're just opting to lean into James Conner on the ground, not push heavy volume. They seem a little lackadaisical, even when down. They're not pushing volume aggressively through the air. And unfortunately, Marvin Harrison Jr. is suffering for that. And at some point, maybe this turns around as they move into more difficult matchups and have to continue to push volume here. But it's just a peculiar situation where you maybe want to buy into the talent of Marvin Harrison Jr. and not completely panic over the fact that the volume has been extremely low, because it doesn't appear to be his fault. It's just the function of how this offense is maybe easing into the season.
Yeah, you mentioned volume. That leads me to my next guy here too, because there was a lot of panic over Brandon Ayuk early on in the season. Last week, 12 targets. So Garrett Wilson, 22. Darnell Mooney, 16. Jefferson, 14. T. Higgins, 14. Drake London, 12. Brandon Ayuk, 12. Zay Flowers, 12. Josh Downs, 12. Darius Slayton, 11. I mean, we know that the volume is finally starting to come for Brandon Ayuk. And this should not really surprise anybody, considering what happened with Brandon Ayuk to begin the season. He wasn't in training camp. If you look at the three wide receivers who missed training camp this season, it really shouldn't catch anyone off guard here why they are struggling. Like if you look at the first read options, as far as passing is going, a first read target share, both CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and Brandon Ayuk saw a dip in those first reads. That shouldn't surprise anybody. It really shouldn't. But with Brandon Ayuk, you're sitting here and he finally had that game where he's popping. You knew it was just a matter of time. Now, I thought maybe it would come last week or the week before, not in week number 5. But hey, better late than never. And I think he's going to get right back to it where he was one of the top wide receivers last season. And I think we're going to see that again going from this point throughout the rest of the season, because he's too good of a football player not to produce. Like I talk about everything when we talk about that ass score and all these other kind of things there from fantasy points, courtesy of them, and the separation. He's one of the top separators in the league. I think he's number 2 actually when it came to his separation score of 0.253, which was just behind Jordan Addison, just above Keenan Allen, Jameson Williams, Mike Evans, Luke McCaffrey, by the way, from the slot is one of the best separators. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Michael Wilson, Nico Collins. A lot of those names are big-time names. Overall, 33.5% win rate for Brandon Ayuk. We talk about that number 1 rate there, first read there, 27.2%. So we're seeing some production finally start to come from Brandon Ayuk. The numbers, the metrics, they're starting to line up. Remember, I think it was last week where someone actually mentioned separation in a press conference to Kyle Shanahan and asked him if he's aware that Brandon Ayuk is good at football. And Shanahan's like, yeah, we know he's good at football. This shouldn't be a surprise. Well, now the metrics and the numbers are finally starting to coincide with each other. If you bought low on him in the previous weeks, congratulations, because I think that window is starting to close, and it's going to start closing faster now than ever before.